Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our Exploring Islamic Psychology colloquium. We will begin very shortly. In a minute, I will be introducing our distinguished speakers. Before we do that, I'd like to wish you all from Sydney, Australia, welcome, Juma Mubarak, and peace be with you all. Assalamu alaikum. We have a very exciting panel of colloquium expert scholars who, as you'll see, Professor Rassool and, of course, Associate Professor Zuleyha Keskin and practitioner Hanan Dover will be addressing us on this important aspect of Islamic psychology. Of course, we're all interested here because I've seen the registrations, because somehow this area of psychology is something that's very, very relevant to us modern human beings. But with Muslims in particular, we have a particular interest in how this has existed in our tradition and how it continues to be developed by Islamic scholarship. And we have our distinguished speakers who will address us on these topics. So a very welcome to everybody who's just joined us and who's currently joining us. I'm going to start by introducing our distinguished panelists before they begin. I have sent you their details. Our first speaker is Professor Hussein Rassool, who is a professor of Islamic psychology. He's currently at the Center for Islamic Studies and Civilizations at Charles Sturt University. He's also, quite an avid publisher, an author, very distinguished in this field. He comes from a clinical and professional background also. He has many titles and roles, including the Director of Studies for the Department of Islamic Psychology, Psychotherapy and Counseling, and is the chair of the Al-Balagh Institute of Islamic Psychology and Research. I'll allow you to read the rest of his detail. This afternoon, he will be addressing us on the topic of his paper, which is Towards a New Islamic Scholarship in Islamic Psychology, integrating maqasid methodology and critical frameworks. Our second speaker is Associate Professor Zuleyha Keskin. She is the Associate Head of the Center of Islamic Studies and a lecturer in Islamic spirituality. She's co-founded ISA Australia. She also has many hats. She's also been quite instrumental in pushing forward the Masters of Islamic Psychology at SISAC, and I'll allow her to speak about that later. She'll be addressing us this afternoon on the topic of, just bear with me. Yes, so she'll be addressing us on the topic of Islamic theological approach to the attachment theory. Wonderful topic, once again, that we'll be diving into. And our final speaker panelist is none other than Hanan Dover, a practitioner, a certified, she's also developed the Islamic Studies course along with Zuleyha. She coordinates and teaches courses on psychology, but she's also an experienced clinical and forensic psychologist. She has a special interest in trauma, mood, anxiety-related disorders, sex therapy, chronic pain, psychopathy and deception, and much more. So she will be speaking to us about Afiya and Well-being in Islam. So now that I've introduced my distinguished panelists, please help them feel welcome by doing a virtual round of applause. And there's Hanan as well. I'll just pin her. Welcome, Hanan. Add spotlight. I think that's how I do it. Oops, I did something wrong. Anyway, I will now like to hand over to Professor Rassool. If you can please share your screen with us and begin.
Thank you, Dr. Ansari. Thank you very much for inviting me. Now let me find why I'm sharing my slides, so hopefully you can hear me and also you can see me.
I can hear you very clearly.
Right, slides. Slide, where is it now? From beginning. Okay, right. So hope you can see. Good.
Just a reminder that you'll have plenty of opportunity for question and answer. Please feel free to engage in the chat box, and I'll be moderating those. Thank you, Professor Rassool. I won't interrupt again. Over to you.
Please, just let me know about 5 minutes beforehand, so I can rush a bit. Okay, let's start. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الكريم وعلى آله وصحبه ومن سن بسنته يوم الدين ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني ويفقهوا قولي السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Welcome. Thank you very much for inviting me, and I'm trying to shorten it because I have more time to speak. Let's go straight into to this particular presentation. What I want to do is to first of all to just give you a context. So the scholarship, during the golden period of Islam, what the Orientalists call the golden age, I call it the Renaissance period. And then we're going to look at very few minutes, something on limitation of existing problem with Islamic studies, and also for Islamic psychology. And finally, we're going to look at, how can we apply the Makasib methodology to Islamic psychology. They all new, all these things are new, because what we're trying to do is trying to work on it. We're still very early stage in terms of applying Makasib methodology. Makasib methodology, nothing to do with Sharia. You're going to see in a minute anyway. It's something else. Okay, let's start from some. Excuse me. I'm just trying to be totally immodest here, and this is my new book. Most of the content would be appearing in that book anyway, and later on, maybe at the end of the year, this book is going to appear anyway. So being public, it's in process of publication at the moment, so it's not printed yet. Let's move on. What I want to talk about is to look at how during the what I call the Renaissance period of Islam, that again, debate what in the period of time, let's say it's from the 9th century to up to 6th, 17th century, of course there was a flourishing period of scholarship in everything. There was ijtihad, there was innovation, there was increase in knowledge, and a time of remarkable, in fact, the advancements in various fields, to do with medicine, to do with philosophy, to do with science, to do with mathematics, and many more, of course, anyway. But two things happened at that time. One was the House of Wisdom, the Beit al-Hikmah, which was based in Baghdad, where, it was a renowned center for multidisciplinary work. There was a multidisciplinary ethnicity and professional as well from different religious backgrounds. They were there translating and preserving ancient texts anyway. But also at the same time, it was the Qarawin University in Fez, Morocco. It's called Kairouan, yeah, or Carioun in French, I think. Anyway, and it's one of the oldest universities continually operating until today. In fact, it was not Al-Azhar. Al-Azhar came later on anyway. So with those two things happening, although there were a lot of other things happening, there was so in fact, knowledge was integrated. We didn't say, right, this is secular knowledge, this is Islamic knowledge. No, knowledge was knowledge. Knowledge, whether it's secular or Islamic, equal from one person, one source, divine revelation, and so forth. So in fact, there was integration of knowledge, but also integration in terms of research. We use a variety of methodology for research. We're going to see that in a minute anyway. So in fact, the early classical scholars, Islamic scholars, laid the foundation for experimentation, for observation, and for the scientific method as we know it today. Let's move on. I was saying that the integration of knowledge, this is in the field of course there was no psychology, but in maths, scholars demonstrated profound integration of knowledge by combining both empirical observation with physical thought, because philosophy was very much prominent at that time, and of course a lot of people were philosophizing rather than doing observation or even trying to find empirical evidence. But they tried to understand the complexity of the human psyche and behaviors anyway. But also Islamic scholars recognize that understanding the human mind or human psyche require more than just philosophy. You can't just base it on philosophy or philosophical speculation. You know? It necessitates something else. You know, it necessitates both observation and experimentation as well. Let's take an example. In the study of dreams, scholars like Al-Farabi and also Ibn Qayyim al-Juzwiyya not only philosophize about the meaning of dreams, but also they observe patterns of dreams. Yeah, they observe pattern dreams, but how many times the dreams occurs and so forth. So they observe patterns, but also, you know, what are their psychological effects anyway. So very early on, they move away from, not move away, but they combine philosophical speculation with observation, with interaction anyway as well. So these basically lay the groundwork, you know, and for later development in psychological methodology. Again, it's just what I said in the sense of having empirical psychology and first some observation and experiment, but which became the foundation of modern scientific psychology anyway. You know, because initially, after philosophical speculation, Islamic scholars recognized the importance of first-hand observation. It's like a form of anthropology anyway, you know, participant observation as well. You know, so through interaction with individual, scholars gain insight into the nuance of human experience or human responses, and also in variety of setting, in variety of situation as well. At the same time, scholars' empirical approach, which, you know, align with broader Islamic tradition, you know, of seeking knowledge through observation, but also through reflection. We shall move on. This is another example up right here. How the different Islamic scholars, or not no Islamic scholars, but also school, you know, the research methodology. Rational method, for example, Ibn Sina, Al-Biruni, the narrative method was used for certain themes. Intuitive method, Sufism, mysticism, commensal method, based on logic, principle of jurisprudence, and integrate method where you use all of them both. Anyway. So nowadays, I think, from Islamic perspective, you know, I think for us, in terms of research scholarship, I think we need to look at mixed research method, in fact, a combination of all the different methods. This is a bit of the context of where we were at that time and where we are now. Let's move on. Now, nowadays there are, oops, what's happening? Oh, right. There are limitations. We have limitation, although this apply mainly to Islamic studies, you know, generally, but what we're trying to do, me and many others are trying to look at, you know, how do we apply this limitation of Islamic studies, you know, in relation to Islamic psychology. And you have to be familiar with this book. If you have time, please do read it. It's a very interesting book. Jasser Oda, a lot of people know him in Australia. He's just been touring, you know, he was touring in Indonesia and Malaysia and many other places recently when I was in Indonesia. His book on Islamic scholarship, Maqasid Methodology as a New Approach. And, you know, in chapter 2, he talked about these particular limitation of Islamic studies. He didn't apply it. I'm trying to apply it to Islamic psychology. In terms of imitation, taqlid, we follow blindly, you know, taqlid, follow blindly, you know, imitate everything else, you know. For example, I'm not going to focus too much on this because we take a whole lecture in itself. But for example, in Islamic psychology, we would imitate, you know, we would provide an equivalence of ego and superego to the nafs of Amara, nafs of Lawama, and nafs of Mutmainah. Right, they come from different ideology. You know? The human nature, Freudian human nature, and our fitra are totally opposite. So that's what I'm talking about, imitation, but also partialism. We use certain things when Islamic psychology is happening now. We use certain things, because it's our friend who's saying about it, or we use material from a certain school of thought, from different, school of jurisprudence either. So this is partial. Apologism is a form of schizophrenic, really, in the sense that that's what just I would have talked about anyway. It's a form of defense mechanism, and this defense mechanism, it's trying to where individual rationalize or justify their action, beliefs, and behavior in the light of Islamic thought. So we have apologism in Islamic studies, of course, both as a sort of a moral rationalization and also religious. They're also contradiction, and deconstruction. I can't, this particular thought, if you go, we need another lecture for that itself. Anyway, I just thought I'd introduce it to it. And if you look at, if you apply some of the things to Islamic psychology, you find that lots of things. Misrepresentation, epistemology of bias. If you look at methodology of research, and sometimes people are making global, model based on very limited, research. The problem with deficit in methodology, blind imitation, partialism, all these that apply to Islamic studies. We could apply it. I've tried to do that. I've done it in my book on research, I think chapter 2 or 3. Anyway, on how these can be applied. But also, I think there's a paper coming back, inshallah, in one of the Australian Journal of Islamic Studies on this thing. So we can read it afterwards. Anyway, I don't want to focus on, because that will take a long time. I want to really focus on this with the McAsset methodology. This again was something that was developed by Justin Oda, and it made, I think, a significant shift, and as we're going to see in this presentation anyway, because the new approach pioneered by, as I say, Professor Oda, represent a departure from traditional, we're changing our cognitive sets in a way of looking at research. From sort of, we're looking at the research from Islamic worldview. That's what's important. We are looking at the research from, some people call it Quranic worldview, rather from a Western-oriented, Orientalist, Eurocentric worldview. That's the difference anyway. What it does with this methodology, it addresses shortcomings observed in the past. Again, it applies mainly to Islamic studies. I'm trying to apply it to Islamic psychology. So, and also, what are the methodological problems in Islamic research, in Islamic studies? Striving to provide what this particular model or framework, rather, does. It tries to provide some sort of comprehensive and also some sort of integrating method or integrative method, because everything is connected in Islam, everything. So we have that interconnection, we have that holism or holistic approach, but at the core of it, at the core of this particular framework, is a recognition that the Quran and Sunnah, is the ultimate source of knowledge. I mean, of course, this is the same as, in Islamic psychology, our primary source of knowledge is divine, is the Quran and Sunnah, anyway. And so these interconnectedness allows Islamic scholars, to navigate different fields, anyway, of knowledge, and maintain some sort of consistent reference point, anyway. So it's hoped that, there's an expectation that this McAsset methodology would help to reshape, our thinking, to reshape Islamic research in general, and, how it is conducted, how, the leverage of the richness of Islamic teaching, and which would be in harmony with contemporary scholarship. We're not rejecting contemporary scholarship, we're not rejecting evidence-based practice, but we're trying to harmonize, and navigate through this harmony. This is basically, it's again take a long time. I try to explain to it. And now my question is, maybe you could answer it now. I don't know, you're very good. Why there's no problem definition in these particular steps? Maybe we could answer afterwards. Think about it in the meantime. Now, we start with purpose. Why? Because I want to explain why we don't have it. So because Islamic worldview is based on purpose. Islamic worldview is not based on problem definition. Okay, what the purpose? Why am I doing it? Why am I doing this research? But also from existing scholarship, research scholarship, we don't have purpose and intention. In fact, before we have the purpose, we have to have the intention. We have to have the niyyah. Nawawi, first hadith, for the hadith, Nawawi, intention, precede action. So what is our intention? Now, whatever we do is to worship Allah. Whatever, even if we do research that's going to benefit the ummah, we're going to do research to help, diabetic patient. It's helping the ummah. This is, in a way, worship Allah. So we have intention, what we intend to do. First of all, of course, worship Allah is the primary purpose, but also, a secondary purpose as well. So we have intention and purpose. So the purpose is initial steps, in defining the objective of the research. It set out the direction, the scope, the nature, the goals. It ensures that this particular study or research is aligned with the intended outcome. There must be constructive alignment between intended outcome and purpose, and of course the methodology as well. Then we move on to Quran and Sunnah. What we mean by that, reflection or cycle reflection, which when we go back after our purpose, we go back to the Quran and Sunnah. What the Quran and Sunnah teaches about it, maybe Hadith. What the Hadith teaches about, what the Quran teaches about these things. So this is the cycle of reflection. This doesn't stop there. It carries on throughout the whole process of research. So in a way, what we are saying here, that we are encouraged by the Quran to reflect and contemplate on the Quran and the world. So researchers engage, in a continuous cycle of reflection, of not only reflection, but also introspection, anyway, evaluating the assumptions, biases, and perspective, and then going self-reflection and show that the research remain aligned with Islamic belief and practices, that the research is aligned with Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, and also with the worldview and prevent potential deviation. Is it 15 minutes gone?
Yes.
Okay. So also we have after that, we go to a framework. The framework, I'm going to show you about it. It's more complex. And then the critical studies of literature is a literature review, like we do normally. And also you have formative theories and principles, and that go back to the purpose again anyway. But I want to move on. So when we talk about critical studies, is you analyze existing literature, like you do normally, And formal theories is the same, conceptual and theoretical framework, the same as you do as before. The only difference is you have purpose, but also you have first of all, you have intention, you have purpose, and cycle of reflection, and then you use a framework. Now the framework comes next, okay? This is the framework. So basically, when we look at framework, we look at, within the Maqasid methodology, you have 7 essentials, elements, which contribute, they intricately, they are interconnected. They contribute to the conceptualization of Islamic worldview composite. And these elements are there. You have concepts, you have objective, you have values, you have command, you have universal laws, you have groups and proof. And you could do, in fact, I tried to do a map, concept map, using this on Islamic psychology. Hopefully one day I'll show you, but it's my handwriting, and there, it just was done by pen and pencil really, But so you try to apply this. Again, this is just, I'll give you some agenda setting, but if you're interested, you can read the book and things like that. And also there's a course on it and a postgraduate diploma in Maqasid methodology. And so you apply these things, you apply the concept, objective, values, framework, universal law group, and so forth. All these you can do using cycle of reflection, because you always reflect on the Quran and also the Sunnah anyway. And I'll move on because I have very little time. So don't know what's happening. Oops. So of course, you know, the concepts if applied to Islamic psychology research, a concept, you have objective, the values, and so forth. But you know, and I try to apply this particular methodology in one of the study I did for the postgraduate diploma in Makassar methodology, and you know, looking at predictors of role legitimacy and role support of universal lecture in knowledge integration of Islamic studies and ethics in the psychology curriculum. Anyway, so I did that for the course and applied. Of course, you know, I had no other model to do it. I did it. But you know, of course, not everything's going to fit in with the model. The model is flexible; it's not rigid. Yeah, so you can use existing research methodology and try to fit in within that framework. Anyway, well, this is it. Anyway, and, you know, my purpose. You can see you can have this. You can have this PowerPoint presentation later on in as a PDF. So my prevention of faith, personal knowledge integration, holistic concept, and so on. And then I did a mapping of the framework. Do you remember the framework? Talk about the concept, the objective, the values, the command. You know, which the commands to do with verses of Quran or Hadith. Yeah, universal laws and so on, like fitra, groups, and proof. I've used that. This is just an example how you can use it. Of course, this is still under construction in a way. In fact, we have with the Makkah Institute. I'm chairing the Islamic Psychology Research Network. Soon we're going to invite people to join us. Anyway, it's going to try how we can apply, you know, Makkah methodology with nothing to do. In fact, it comes before the maqasid of Sharia. Okay? It comes before that. Yeah, that mechanism. It comes before that. You know, so it's nothing to do with. It's of course it's relevant. You know, with maqasid. You know, the higher objective of Islamic law, the maqasid methodology, even the qawaid of fiqhiyya. You know, the maxim legal. All these are part of it, but this framework comes before even the maqasid of Sharia, and also because the qawaid of fiqhiyya. Anyway, I stop there anyway. So you can see that it is for me, it's a very robust framework. It's a different way of working. It's a different looking at it. But what's important is that that cycle of reflection make us go back to the Quran and Sunnah. Anyway, I'll stop there because I hope I'm within my time. Thank you very much. Jazakallah khair.
Jazakallah khair, and thank you so much. Such an important topic. Especially for those who are diving into in terms of methodology and maqasid for Islamic psychology students, but also others.
Islamic studies as well, yeah.
Islamic studies as well is a very good methodological propositions that you made. We will now allow for just one burning, if you have a burning question for Professor Rassool, I will take only one. And if you can please type it there. Otherwise, I'll ask you to hold on to it or put it into the chat box. And I promise you, we're going to have a panel of discussion. So as I cannot see any burning questions,
that's good.
Okay. Please I want you to think about what we've just heard, a rich discussion. And thank you so much, Professor Rassool. Our next speaker is Professor Zuleyha Keskin. Associate Professor, I've already introduced our panelists. So I will ask Zuleyha now to, oops, excuse me. I will just, yes, I will pin her so that we can see her. There you go. And okay, Maheen, is this a burning question? I will give you that if it's okay. Maheen, go ahead in the chat box if it's a burning question. You mentioned there's no problem question. Can you please elaborate on that? Do you want to briefly address that in a minute, Professor Rassool, or you can take that later also?
What question was that?
So Maheen is asking, you mentioned there's no problem question. Can you please elaborate on that?
Yeah, what was it? No, of course, you're following, you're doing a course, you're doing, you know, the regulation about how formatting, you know, what you have to do that sometimes. But we're saying that you can do both, really. You know, if the format of university say, you know, you have to have problem-oriented definition. Okay, what this is that what I was saying that, you know, we within that methodology we don't look at problems, because sometimes you can get wrong. The meaning of it, you can get it wrong, which means that, that would really sway your direction of your research. Yeah. But if you look at the purpose, why am I doing it in the first place? Then that would give you a focus, that would give you a direction. Secondly, Islamic worldview doesn't deal with problem. Islamic worldview deals with purpose. Why are we doing it? Yeah, so that's why we don't have problem-oriented question or define the problem. That's what we do: state the problem or defining the problems. Yeah, in that particular methodology, we have the purpose. What the purpose of the research, and from there on, then we can really clarify or identify whatever problem we are investigating. I'm not saying that we're rejecting anything there. We're just the purpose come before it.
So much, Professor Rassool. And I think we have a few comments, but I'm going to have to ask you to hold that until our panel discussion. Thank you so much, Professor Rassool. And now our next presentation is going to be Associate Professor Zuleyha Keskin. Now, attachment theory, Zuleyha, is something that we hear about a lot. Now, she's going to be talking to us about attachment theory in context of Islamic theology. So over to you, Zuleyha.
I'm on it. Thank you. I hope it's all good now.
Yeah.
Thanks for that, and lovely. Bit hard to follow from Professor Rassool, but here we go. So what I'll be looking at is the attachment theory from, I guess, Islamic theological perspective. And when I was introduced to the attachment theory, I was quite fascinated by it, actually, and I still am. And just understanding how we can relate to, the way I was first introduced was how we relate to other human beings, and how that can vary depending on really where we are positioned. It can vary so much. And that really got me thinking about how our attachment to Allah can be varied as well. So that's really where I started from. So for those of you who may not have heard of the attachment theory, it was first introduced by John Bowlby. He was the first attachment theorist, and he introduced it in the 50s and 60s, and then he further developed it in the 60s. And since then, many scholars have written on the topic. And basically, his focus was that lasting psychological connectedness between human beings, understanding how we relate to others, how we connect with them, and particularly the focus is about how it started was how children relate to their primary caregiver. So what kind of relationship that they have and what influences that. And we know, I guess we know that all not primary caregivers are able to give the ideal parenting, and what are the implications of this. So that's where it is. I won't go into too much details explaining the attachment styles, but I'll maybe touch a bit on them because it does help to understand the context. So the idea is, imagine a 2-year-old, and they have needs basically, and they rely on their primary caregiver to have those needs met. And so if that child has an absent caregiver, that child will do things to try to get the attention of the parent. So they might cry, and that doesn't work, then they might try to laugh. If that doesn't work, they might throw a tantrum. So they'll basically try whatever they can. They will activate basically to try to get the attention of the caregiver. And this makes them quite anxious because it's not readily available. The attention that they get for the purpose of looking after that child is not readily available. So that's anxious attachment style. And then the avoidant attachment is where you might have a child who has a parent who is quite absent again, but the parent could be absent, physically, as in they're just not around as much, or even mentally. Even mentally, they might not be present. And so a child has learned, therefore, then to look after themselves, basically, to meet their own needs. They've learned that you can't rely on other people. So what's interesting with anxious attachment, they usually end up having that mindset that the other that is good and I'm not good. So they usually have, strong, I guess, question marks about themselves. With the avoidant attachment, because they've learned to self-soothe themselves, they've learned that the other is not good. I am good, or I am reliable. And with the anxious avoidant attachment style, they could be basically fluctuating between the two. So they would go to anxious, where they might activate, they try to get the attention. And when the person comes close to them, then they become avoidant, where they don't want that person anymore. So it's a very confused state. And obviously the secure attachment is the ideal one, where, in this case, a 2-year-old, when they were crying, the parent would attend to them most of the time, and they would, comfort them, provide their needs, and therefore that 2-year-old becomes conditioned and aware that their needs can be met by their primary caregiver, and they have a healthy relationship with their caregiver, and they're in a good space in that sense. So that's where it's coming from. And there's been a lot of research and literature on different attachment to different things. Like in this case, it started off with a parent-child, and then there was also exploration of, adult relationships. And some of you would have read the book Attached, where it's looking at that, basically adult relationships and how people can have these different types of relationships. And the argument is usually that it stems from their childhood. And then what's interesting is, I'm not the first to think about, how does this relate to God? Definitely, I'm not the first. So Kirkpatrick looked at it particularly from a Christian perspective, and looking at how, a person who, how a person's attachment to God, or firstly, can God be an attachment figure? And if so, how does that work? And is it applicable? And his general conclusion was that, yes, it is applicable. And particularly when you think about with a child-adult relationship, the relationship between that and a child and and God is somewhat similar, in the sense that you've got one who's dependent on the other, one who's more in an authoritative position. So there's a lot of similarities in that sense between that relationship between, I guess, a servant of God, and say a child and a parent. Obviously, it's not absolutely the same, but you see that that's because of the different levels of authority between the two, it seems quite relatable. And some argue that it's actually more relatable to when you're trying to apply the attachment theory to relationships where you've got two human beings who are usually on the equal, status, because they're in the relationship, in a human relationship. So, that's where the attachment theory is, and you can use it. Basically, we've argued that you can use it for attachment to God. Now, Ainsworth has identified 4 criteria for a healthy attachment. Okay, so I've said that the idea is you need to have secure, healthy attachment, and there's ways to get there. But basically, there are 4 criteria that are considered that have to be met for a person to have a healthy attachment. And so my research, I guess, and my exploration is, does this fit with, Islamic theology? So the first one is maintaining proximity with the attachment figure. So the attachment figure, there's this closeness that's felt to them. Using the attachment figure as a secure base for explorative behavior. So they feel that's their secure base, and then they can go and explore. They feel comfortable or confident enough to explore, but knowing that that base is there. Third one, regarding the attachment figure as a haven of safety. So there's this comfort, safety that comes with knowing that, that authority figure or that attachment figure is there. And fourthly, experiencing anxiety when separated from the attachment figure. So that idea of not having that attachment figure, connectable, creates anxiety. So if these are there, then the idea is it's a healthy attachment. So I've also note that there has been some very little research done on Islam and the attachment theory. And there's this particular article, which is probably the most relevant, written by Gabari, Barnab, Minor, and Proctor, about attachment to God from an Islamic spirituality perspective. So it does have a particular methodology where it looks at the attachment theory and looks at Quranic verses, names of Allah, Quranic stories, and approaches it that way. the way I have chosen to approach it is to look at the 4 criteria for healthy attachment and what Islamic concepts help us to achieve those, basically. So I'm arguing that you can have a healthy attachment style to Allah through these concepts. Now, I want to put a disclaimer. This is still preliminary. It's still explorative. I'm still exploring, but you know, there could be other concepts that can go into each one. But this is what I've got at this stage. So on that point, I want to make a side note, which I find fascinating as well, is that, you know, when people or human beings can have an anxious attachment style to Allah, they can have an avoidant attachment style to Allah, as well as a secure attachment. We're looking at secure here. But depending on one's relationship with Allah or how they understand or perceive Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they could have a particular attachment style to Allah. And we see this where someone could be very fearful of Allah because, you know, they may have grown up as a child where Allah is shown as someone who's very angry and very punishing. And so that they're very anxious when they think about Allah. And then when you look at the, you know, I guess the avoidant, it could be that they just don't fully understand the greatness of Allah, or how much of what they do or how much of what's around them is being controlled in a way or is under the power of Allah. And so they rely on themselves more so than they do on Allah. So a person can have these different types of attachment styles, I believe, with Allah as well. So the first one we said was maintaining proximity with the attachment figure for a healthy attachment style. So I would say that the concept of ihsan and ikhlas allows this to happen, and I'll expand on this in future slides. For using the attachment figure as a secure base for explorative behavior, I would say irada, our will, is where that comes into play. The third one, regarding the attachment figure as a haven of safety, the tawheed, knowing that there is the oneness of God, and I'll explore that as well. And finally, experiencing anxiety when separated from the attachment figure, the concept of mutma'inna, as in feeling contentment in the remembrance of Allah. So the first one, if we look at maintaining proximity with the attachment figure, you know, there is in Islam it's very embedded that Allah is closer to us. And this particular verse would come into minds of many of you, where Allah says, I am closer to you than your jugular vein. So it's, you know, clearly highlights that Allah is very close to us. And that should help one to have that secure, you know, at least one of the criteria have been met for that secure attachment. I say that ihsan is also an important part of this, because based on this hadith, or part of the hadith, also known as hadith of Jibreel, it is to worship Allah as if you can see him, for although you cannot see him, he can see you. So again, this hadith, you know, and that's the whole idea of ihsan, where there's that level of God consciousness, God awareness, where a person knows that Allah is present and Allah sees all that I do. He is close to me. So that also creates that closeness. I would say that ikhlas is also one of those concepts that help with this proximity aspect. Ikhlas means, in definition, to do acts of worship for the sake of Allah. So when acts of worship are done, a person is always conscious of Allah. So they've constantly, therefore, got a relationship with Allah. And with this worship, it could be the 5 pillars of Islam, or it could be fasting, but it could be anything that's done for the sake of Allah. And if that's done for the sake of Allah with the intent of it being worship, it could be studying, it could be working. You're working so that you can provide for your family, and you're doing that for the sake of Allah. So that could be a source of ikhlas as well. And therefore, there is that proximity to Allah at all times as well through the actions. So we can see that through ihsan and ikhlas, that connection or closeness to Allah is very much there. So that's the first one, the proximity. The second one we said was using the attachment figure as a secure base for explorative behavior. And so to me here, particularly, I want to focus on the explorative behavior, where you're going out and you're doing things. You have the confidence to be able to do things. And this particular Quranic verse came to my mind with this. This is the reward for what your hands have done. and Allah is never unjust to his creation. So there's this, you're involved in behavior, you're involved in actions. But it also creates this, I guess, a message that Allah knows what you do. So, there's that aspect of it too. So Allah as a secure base is the rules and guidelines. So when you have a secure base, it's like you've got this comfort in knowing that these rules and guidelines, way of life exists. You know exactly what is expected of you. There's no unpredictability. There's no randomness. There is not spontaneity in that the expectations from you is quite clear. And this kind of consistency provides the security that a person needs. And so the explorative behaviors, as I said, is through the human will, where humans have the free will to go out and explore. Humans are encouraged to explore, and in order particular to realize their potential. Of course, the parameters of that is the using of the Islamic teachings and principles, but that free will gives a level of agency to humankind, because they know that they're going to be responsible and accountable based on their actions. But they know they have free will and they implement that. Thirdly, regarding the attachment figure as a haven of safety. And the Quranic verse that comes to mind, Allah, there is no God worthy of worship except him, the ever-living, all-sustaining. So there's this sense that he is the one that's worthy of worship, therefore he is the great one, but he's also the ever-sustaining one. So he's the source of safety, security, sustenance, and so forth. And to me here, the Tawheed notion really comes to mind, because when you truly grasp the notion of Tawheed, which is a fundamental belief in Islam, it is, that Allah is everywhere. You know that Allah's knowledge and power is over all things. And that in itself creates a sense of security and safety. There's comfort that comes from that, knowing that nothing happens without his will.
5 minutes.
Okay. And fourthly, experiencing anxiety when separated from the attachment figure. And the verse that comes to my mind with this one is, surely in the remembrance of Allah do hearts find rest. So they're basically, the notion of tatmin, mutma'inna, contentment, serenity. This Quranic verse is saying that only when we remember Allah do we find that kind of rest and that comfort and the serenity. Associating remembrance of Allah, and you can't remember Allah if you're not connected to him, if you're not attached to him. Unless you're attached to him, you will not be able to find that serenity. So if you flip that, basically, if you are separated from Allah, if you feel disconnected from Allah, there's going to be a feeling of anxiety. So Allah is the source of peace and contentment, and a severing of that connection, severing of that attachment creates or what makes one experience anxiety. So that brings me to the end of it. And look forward to having your questions afterwards about that as well.
So much, Zuleyha. Wonderful presentation. Let's give her a virtual round of applause. There's a lot of questions as well, but I'm going to not take them, and I will make sure we take them in the Q&A. But just quickly, since you have been instrumental with Hanan also in designing the Islamic psychology courses, would you like to just briefly mention that for some of our audiences who might be interested in that course?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So we do have an information session coming up on Tuesday, this coming Tuesday. AEDT daylight savings does start on this Sunday. So please, if you're interested in the grad cert in Islamic psychology, come along to the information session, and Hanan will tell you all about what is encompassed in it, what to expect from it, and so forth. Also, if you want to read about the Islamic psychology course, we do have our website here. And I will provide the links to that in the chat for anyone that might be interested.
Thank you, Zuleyha. I've uploaded the link to the event, but if you can put the other one, that will be great. Thank you so much. And let's go to our final speaker. Certainly, hang on a minute. I'll just pin her here. Okay, and I've already introduced a wonderful clinician and practitioner and expert in the room, Sister Hanan Dover, and I just want to briefly just go over her topic. So Hanan will be speaking to her, like looking at her expertise in the field in terms of being a clinical psychologist in the areas that I already read to you. She will be exploring the topic of Afiya and well-being in Islam and what that means. So let's over to you, Sister Hanan, inshallah.
Okay.
You should be able to share your screen.
Yeah.
It's coming up. I can see it.
Okay, excellent. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. I'm just going to put it on. Oh, let's go backwards. Okay. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Peace be with you all. So yeah, today I am going to be looking at exploring the concept of Afiya in Islamic psychotherapy and psychology, and looking at its importance from its root definition, how we understand it, how it's interconnected with the Islamic traditions and values. Because I do believe as clinicians, if you're working in the mental health space, especially if you're working with Muslim clients, that you need to be aware of some of the key concepts within Islamic psychotherapy or within the Islamic studies realm that deal with mental health, because often that has therapeutic benefits. And as a clinician, that's what we look for, as whether you're a psychologist or a social worker, or a psychiatrist, or even a counselor, or even a chaplain, really, you have to look at, okay, what concepts can you actually use quite freely and interchangeably with some of the common concepts we understand in mental health with Muslims, because often that has a spiritual influence. And we know as in Islam, that Islam doesn't just see human beings in a physical realm or even emotional or psychological, but also within our spiritual frameworks. And that underpins the graduate certificate in Islamic psychology throughout the course. And Zuleyha's presentation in terms of attachment theory, we actually cover that in a lot of detail also within the course. So if we look at why Afiya would be important for mental health practitioners, because in our realm of mental health, we have to be culturally competent. And we also, when we're dealing with not just Muslim clients, but clients who have a different cultural frame of reference, we have to be able to tap into their spiritual processes, because often those who come from non-English speaking backgrounds or those who have a religious background, we have to look at, okay, so what is their overall makeup? Because mental health is all about their overall makeup, because you have different influences from their day-to-day experiences, whether it's what they eat, what they their communities, what they do on a day-to-day basis in terms of physically where they work or exercise, but also we have to look at their interpersonal relationships with other people. And as Zuleyha's presentation looked at, our one of our significant connections and interrelationships is with God when you are very religious. So we need to tap into that aspect of a human being when we're dealing with mental health issues with people who are religious or spiritual. And so our duty as mental health professionals extends beyond the mere alleviation of psychological distress. It includes nurturing spiritual harmony and fostering holistic well-being. So in modern psychology, me being a psychologist, we're very deficit focused, and we're starting to move away from just being deficit focused. If you're aware of the DSM-5, that's been revised, for example, it's a very clinical deficit focused textbook that underpins our profession. But there is a large movement towards looking at more positive forms and optimistic forms of psychology, but also nurturing cultural frameworks and spiritual frameworks to foster holistic well-being. And from an Islamic perspective, when we integrate the concept of Afiya into our practice with Muslim clients, we can actually provide a more culturally competent and spiritually enriched area to our clients, which contributes to their overall holistic healing and wellness. Because even for myself being a psychologist, I don't just look at psychological well-being. We look at it holistically. How can I help this person and assist them in the day-to-day functioning from from a wellness or well-being perspective, which is just not psychological in and of itself. So it's about integrating all our knowledge to, at the end, give our clients, we want to enhance better mental health outcomes. So the concept of Afiya is rooted in Islamic tradition. It encapsulates a multifaceted notion of well-being that goes beyond the absence of illness. And I'll be looking at that in my presentation. So it not only encompasses the physical health, but also mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being. We know in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, Allah does not burden a soul beyond that it can bear. So this emphasizes the importance of psychological well-being and also resilience. So there isn't a definition. So there's no straight definition of Afiya in Islam. It encapsulates a lot of our values and concepts, though, and I'm going to go through them. So firstly, it's the physical health, and well-being, and this signifies being free from illness and ailments and disease. And the Quran acknowledges the importance of physical health when it states, and your body has rights upon you, because we know that God, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, has given us our body as a trust, and it's our duty in our during the time in our dunya to make sure that we give justice to our body, because our body and our organs and will hold us to account on the day of judgment. So our body's a trust. We need to, and we're expected to look after it. And then you've got the mental and emotional well-being, where it extends to that as well. But this implies inner peace and contentment and emotional stability. We know in terms of the stages of the soul, all scholars agree that there are three stages of the soul. But when we get to the highest, which is nafs mutma'inna, the contented soul, because that's our goal, that's our journey in life. Our journey is to be able to transition from the lower forms of the soul to the higher forms, which include where we need to be sincere about our connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and our goals and motivations and our values are actually actioned where they're connected to Allah. That's the sole purpose. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to us in the Quran, he only created man and jinn in order to worship him. So we need to fulfill that in our everyday life. And so the Quran mentions the tranquility of the heart and soul as an aspect of Afiya. We know in a hadith where Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam stated that on the day of judgment, your children nor your wealth will benefit you. The only thing that will benefit you are those who have good character, but also those who have a sound heart, a non-oscillating heart. So a heart that's free of anxiety. And when I say free of anxiety, I'm not talking about the clinical psychological anxiety, the physiological. I'm talking about the spiritual anxiety. When our hearts are content, our hearts are also at rest. And when I'm talking about the spiritual heart, so there's also the spiritual well-being, which is a significant aspect of Afiya, and also a significant aspect of understanding Islamic psychology. And that involves a deep sense of connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Zuleyha had touched on that just earlier, and the attainment of spiritual contentment and also enlightenment. So in achieving spiritual Afiya implies a strong relationship with one's faith and a sense of purpose in life. So our whole psychology, our whole cognition, our whole spirituality, and even our movement, our physical movement needs to be aligned with our fitra, our natural state, which is to please and obey and try and understand our deen and love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's also the social and interpersonal harmony and relationship to others, and this is also important in current modern psychology, where we've come to understand that psychological ailments and illnesses are also connected to our interpersonal relationships with other people. Could be family, could be community, could be colleagues, could be peers, and so forth. How we relate to other people, impacts our psychological health. And in Islam, that also, there's an understanding that also impacts your Afiya, your potential to have good wellness and overall well-being. So, and that's why it's important to foster positive relationships with other people, to maintain good character, and to also resolve conflict. We have a lot of narrations in hadiths where there are examples and ways to address conflict amongst, whether it's family members, people in the community, even leaders, and people who have high social status and those who don't as well. Because our interrelationship with people impacts on our overall well-being and Afiya. Then also the balance on moderation, that is we have to attain a certain mizan or balance in our everyday life, or certain equilibrium. And in Islam, we understand that even eating in moderation, we're instructed to have 1/3 of food in our stomach, 1/3 water, and one third air, and that's to deter gluttony, you know, and also keep us physically well. We have recommended sleeping patterns, the way we work, and even our leisure activities. Islam is not a tradition that just demands of us acts of worship. You know, there also needs to be time for leisure within our lifestyle as well, because that encapsulates a holistic sense of well-being and overall wellness. And it also is important because we're supposed to remove ourselves or ward ourselves from excess and find a balance that's in the middle, so that we can exercise self-control. And then also resilience. We need to, Afiya implies resilience in the face of adversity. Adversity is something that is guaranteed in our life. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala never says that we're not going to suffer from adversity or hardships or difficulties. We are going to face it, but it's how we deal in the face of adversity that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala measures and tests us against. So it means having the strength to be patient, to endure. And patience is not a passive, it's not passive in Islam, it's actually active. So even when you choose to withdraw, that's an active action, you know. And even if you accept that there's nothing beyond your control in the circumstances that you find yourself in, you know, that's also an active form of patience. So we have to be patient whilst maintaining faith and also trust in Allah's wisdom and plan, because we know in our tradition that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the best of planners. And then finally, contentment. Being content with your circumstance, regardless of material wealth or poverty, is a fundamental aspect of Afiya. And it's in line with, you know, the hadith I mentioned earlier, where on the day of judgment, you know, it's us, your wealth is not going to be of benefit. How many children you have is not going to be of benefit, you know, but being content, having a sound heart is going to be what, inshallah, through Allah's mercy, gets you over the line, because that's what we're told. You know, and so this contentment is and gratitude really is rooted in trust in Allah's decree for his blessings. So the roots of Afiya, and to truly appreciate this concept, it's also important to go into the cultural roots. So its origins are from Islam, and it does emphasize the importance of physical and psychological well-being. Obviously, at the time of you know, even early scholars, the word psychology, you know, was not there. It's a modern interpretation, but Islam looked at psychology as being holistic, looking at the soul and looking at the mental processing, looking at your relationships with other people, you know, looking at faith as well, you know, your emotions. So it's very, very, very holistic. And the Prophet ﷺ in his teachings included guidance on maintaining Afiya in various aspects of life, such as your diet, what you eat, the sleep, and interpersonal relationships. And I emphasizing interpersonal relationships because people don't often see interpersonal relationships as important. And looking at your overall well-being, people tend to look internally. No, but it's our relationships. Even our relationship with the environment, you know, is actually fairly important in terms of Afiya and our overall psychology. And this holistic approach to well-being reflects the deep connection between physical, mental, spiritual, environmental, social. It's all inclusive. And because Islamic understanding of knowledge is not limiting, you know, it's very broad. And as clinicians, when we incorporate Afiya into our therapeutic approach, we acknowledge and honor the unique needs and values of our Muslim clients. And that's what we find with our Muslim clients. They find our sessions quite enriching, especially when we've got training in Islamic psychology or Islam and mental health. You know, we can tap into that spirituality. So when concepts that are modern might be very confusing, you know, we develop trust with our clients when introducing Islamic concepts to them, which they're already familiar with, and because it's important to tap into a person's existing narrative. You know, we find it very hard to introduce modern psychological techniques to our clients. So we get our foot in the door through trust and safety and connection through our Islamic concepts. So when you're a culturally competent therapist, you might use Islamic mindfulness. Instead of using numbers and techniques, for example, I will incorporate dhikr. and it has a profound effect on Muslim clients, because it's something that they are familiar with, and it's rooted in the remembrance of Allah, which is dhikr, as part of the therapeutic process. So the significance of Afiya in psychotherapy is that it is crucial for mental health professionals. It's in a diverse and multicultural world, whether you're in Australia or other parts of the world where it's becoming more multicultural. It's very important that we provide care that respects and integrates an individual's cultural and spiritual beliefs. For example, when I have First Nations and Indigenous clients, I've gone and done extra training in being culturally competent in dealing with First Nations clients, because I can't impart modern psychology or even Islamic psychology with First Nations clients. I need to understand their story, so I can tap into their psychology quite safely and also ethically and responsibly. So with Muslims, by incorporating Afiya into our therapeutic approach, we acknowledge and honor the unique needs and values of our Muslim clients. So in terms of applications, we can apply Afiya in various domains in mental health, in terms of providing a culturally competent assessment. So it allows us to be sensitive and relevant to our clients. And so I know with our intake at work, we actually ask about spiritual values, whether they're religious, whether they're practicing or not practicing, because we also have to seek permission to infuse spiritual practice. I mean, you need to get permission, to infuse anything in your therapeutic practice, because it's a very collaborative process, psychotherapy. And once they give you permission to infuse spiritual therapy, we can actually gain deeper insights into their mental health. So even if a client is Muslim and is angry, with God, for example, is anxious about God, then we will do things a little bit differently, and then slowly develop a bit more trust, because they want to have trust in God, but at the moment that they're just not ready yet. So when we ask about the client's spiritual practice and the impact on the well-being, it forms an integral part of the assessment, because then we know how broad we can go. Also, it integrates treatment approaches. When we incorporate Afiya into our treatment plans, and it aligns with their spiritual values and cultural beliefs, we can include mindfulness, acceptance and commitment therapy. We can infuse spirituality in cognitive behavioral therapy and prayers, and also chronic therapy, and many modalities of the therapeutic process as well. So another application is promoting resilience and the importance of resilience in the face of adversity. And as mental health professionals, we can help clients develop resilience by drawing upon the strength of their faith and also spirituality. So when there's no doom and gloom and everything that's evidence basis, what research, we can draw on the strengths in terms of their attachment to God, or attachment to their faith or community of faith as well, to help them with their psychological illnesses, or nurture or enhance their mental health processing as well. So not only deficit, but improve optimally their mental health. And obviously their faith can be a source of resilience during difficult times. There was a very famous research, I talk about it a lot, in Melbourne, Australia, about 15 years ago, when we had a lot of refugees coming to Australia. And this study was looking at Somali refugees. And those who don't know, Somalis, 99% of them are Muslim. And so the title of the research was a qualitative research, was "Everywhere is Allah's Place," and what the researchers, and they weren't all Muslim, the researchers found, that the Somali refugees could deal with displacement, acculturation, even though it was very difficult. They knew it was hard, but to them, because everywhere was Allah's place, they could deal with those stresses, and this is them drawing on their spirituality and religiosity in order to cope in the face of hardship and be resilient as well. Then you've got your community and family engagement, and this recognizes that Afiya extends to the broader community and also the family context. Remember, as Muslim communities, we're not individualistic, we're collectivistic cultures. So having a community, and we understand in terms of urf and having connection with family is also very important. So in our tradition, it's about encouraging families to support their loved ones, spiritual and mental well-being, and that can be an integral part to the healing process, which is why we actually advocate and encourage in a culturally appropriate psychotherapeutic process to have family members attend sessions, rather than one-on-one, so that we can actually give them skills to support their loved ones, because they'll see us for 50 minutes. They go home to their families are scratching their heads, so we like to upskill the families. So there's a holistic process to that treatment as well. And then in Islamic psychotherapy and psychology, Afiya is seen as the ultimate state of balance and harmony in a mizan in an individual's life, where one experiences tranquility and peace of the soul, nafs mutma'inna, contentment, a sense of purpose, and also connection with the divine. And then it's also a state where one is not merely free from mental anguish, but is also spiritually aligned with their fitrah. So Jazakallah khairan, that was my presentation.
Thank you so much, Hanan. That was wonderful. So we went from methods in Islamic psychology to theology and, attachment theory, and then rounded off with this real clinical and also on the ground, like about what Afiya and well-being is. And so Jazakallah khair. Let's give a round of applause to all our fantastic panelists. Thank you so much. We have now Q&A time. And so please pop your questions in for Hanan also. I'm going to now ask our panelists to come back. So I'm going to just pin Professor Rassool and Zuleyha to come back now in this panel Q&A. Please unmute yourself. We're going to kind of go a little bit back. So what I'll do is I'll ask a question from each of you. I'll go back. There was a couple of questions for Professor Rassool before we rounded that discussion. Some of them are not there anymore. Okay, the first question is, so Professor Rassool, maybe because we talked about Afiya, then maybe I'll go to Hanan's about Afiya if there's a question, and then I'll go back to Professor Rassool if that's okay, because I think they didn't get a question each. All right, there's a couple of comments, a lot of positive comments about Afiya, PERMA, positive psychology. Can the concept of Afiya, Sister Hanan, be applied to non-Muslim clients as well? That's a question from Hajar Hamid.
Yes, because the concept of Afiya is a holistic concept that looks at overall well-being. And you'll find that, whether you're looking at a person's interpersonal relationships, their spiritual well-being, their cognitive and emotional frameworks. I mean, because when I have Muslim clients, for example, just say, for example, I want to integrate anger management, I will still incorporate some of the Islamic notions and traditions without telling them this is what's been done in our traditions. So it's the same for Afiya. Afiya is a concept. It's a concept that you can understand in a multifaceted way, and then you can integrate and apply it in your therapy. Because when I see a client in front of me, I see them as a holistic human being, and what I want to be able to get at the end is Afiya for all my clients. So it's a frame of mind for a clinician to have when they're dealing day to day with clients. So it's not, it's an Islamic concept, but it's just like having Buddhist concepts in mental health. We use, sometimes we use some of the Buddhist concepts or the modern concepts, but what we don't do is use secular concepts, because we don't have a godless tradition in mental health in Islam, or Islamic psychology, or Islamic psychotherapy. So we're able to still use our Islamic concepts and fashion them in a way with our clients when giving workshops, within those ethical frameworks. So it's not that Afiya is an Islamic concept we can't apply it in therapy. We can't apply it with our worldview as clinicians. We can integrate it, and most Muslim clinicians who are trained, who have additional training in Islam, would be doing that within their profession also.
Wonderful. And there's a couple of comments about Afiya being an objective for Islamic studies in K-12 and those sorts of things. Okay, we might go now to take a question for Zuleyha before I go back to Professor Rassool. And there were a good number of questions and comments there for Zuleyha. But if I can group a few of them, some of them were related to fear. I think Insha asked about Zuleyha. I'm going to read two of them that are kind of related. So to what extent fear should be involved in healthy attachment with Allah? And then Zafar's comment about fear. I feel fear is natural when one believes in Allah. You know, that's more of a comment if you want to look at that. So can you kind of address that aspect, Zuleyha, in relation to attachment theory and the fear of Allah?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess because I mentioned how a person can have anxious attachment or avoidant, I'm going to mention what Ibn Qayyim said about this point, an analogy he used, which I think is very powerful. And in that powerful, he says, one's journey to Allah is like one's heart's journey towards Allah is like a bird. The head is the love for God, and one wing is fear, and one wing is hope. So if the head's not there, it's like non-existent. That bird doesn't really exist, or it's not alive, let's say. And, you know, you need both hope and fear. So that's why I would say with secure base, it doesn't mean hope and fear don't exist, but they appear in a balanced manner. So my thing, but he does say in certain situations, and this is where you need, I guess, to be able to make, you know, to draw on these. In certain circumstances, the fear will come more. So especially during comfort times, you're like, am I doing the right thing? You're just evaluating yourself. And at times at calamity, or when, you know, someone's getting into old age and they're getting close to dying, you would lean more towards hope. But you would not generally have a balance between that hope and fear. The challenge is, for example, when you're, you know, if someone's anxious, it's always like, God's going to punish me. Oh my God, this is terrible. I can't get anything right. I've got to do everything perfectly. Otherwise, I'm not good enough. And if you're going too much towards hope, then you're like, it's okay if I commit sin, God forgives anyway. So, and both of these are unhealthy situations to be in as a Muslim. And whereas when you're in a secure position with Allah, you realize that you're responsible for your actions, but at the same time, you can't make it to Jannah without Allah's mercy and compassion. So it's that kind of connection that I try to make with the attachment to Allah. Mishi, there was, oh, sorry, go.
There's a couple of other questions. I thought I'll just if there's anything pressing, please go ahead.
No, it's not so much for me, but there was a question which I would prefer Hanan to answer, maybe after Professor Rassool, about people who've been through trauma and how if they don't have a good relationship with Allah, how do you deal with that? But maybe that could be after.
This is a panel, by the way, so the other speakers can also jump in. So feel free. I am going to address this next question to Professor Rassool, but please, this is why we have a panel so that everyone can, you know, address the issue. So there's a question by Professor Rassool by Roya Abdulaziz, and she's saying, how can we apply Maqasid methodology to raising university student awareness to the reality of the challenges of the Ummah in our times? So how can we apply the methodology?
Right. Thank you. Oops. Thank you very much. Very interesting question. Of course, it's going to be difficult if we're in sort of constraint of Western University. I mean, if you have Department of Islamic Studies and Department of Islamic Psychology, you can do that, you know, and hopefully that would spread around. So yes, of course. I mean, I think the important thing is trying to teach that methodology as an alternative, as an options, as something complementary. Yeah, because I go back to the integration of knowledge. Yeah. Nowadays, we do the whole course about the postgraduate certificate in Islamic psychology is about integration of knowledge. Yeah, we used to. I'm going to answer the other question which somebody else probably requested. Before, we used to talk about Islamization of knowledge. Okay, fine. There's been a movement since, you know, Professor Lataz, Professor, you know, Ismail Farouki, famous Palestinian, was murdered. May Allah bless him. And so it's they started the whole movement and so forth. But the problem is there were so many objectives that they couldn't reach anyway. And also, I think there was a lot of criticism, we won't go into it, that, you know, maybe can you Islamicize physics? Can you Islamize mathematics? So nowadays we tend to use the word which is probably more neutral and less confrontative, is integration of knowledge. So when we talk about integration of knowledge, we're talking about knowledge from different sources. Of course, as a Muslim, we try to filter those who are halal, haram, and so forth, so that we don't form part of our sort of intervention. So in a way, now the Maqasid methodology is part of that sort of domain of integration of knowledge, because what we are doing with the Maqasid methodology is to integrate the Quran and Sunnah within the research methodology. That's what it is. We have an intention, yeah, We have a purpose, and also we have psycho-reflection. Now, the psycho-reflection doesn't go into the literature search, but goes into the literature on the Quran and Sunnah. Yeah. So yes, we can do it, but I think it's a matter of slowly and gradually, and people understand it as an alternative method, as something that need to be developed. I'm not saying that, we are there. No, of course, nobody said that. Even within the Marcus method applied to Islamic studies, it's just an agenda setting it's for all of you nowadays, all these students, and what possibly you're going to be transformative agent in the future, that you're going to carry that scholarship and try with ijtihad, of course, try to renew it and try to make it adaptable, but we don't, we don't lessen, we still have our primary source of knowledge, the Quran and Sunnah. That's the basis of it. So we can do that.
Professor, so a good question there. I think, Zuleyha, you wanted to come back, Hanan, to talk about.
Yeah.
So it's a question about trauma. So Bunda is asking, trauma, angry, and stressful conditions tend to make someone lose their attachment to God. How can psychologists help them praise their connection without rejection?
Okay, so as clinicians, when there is an anxiety towards any type of attachment that one would deem quite healthy, whether it's attachment to parents or God or so forth, we would obviously conduct an assessment on that trauma history and the root of those trauma, and also attachment patterns and also spiritual beliefs. So we try and make it for a client who's got a poor attachment to God culturally safe. So we make the therapy culturally safe and respectful, to where they're at on the religious spectrum. We obviously give them a lot of psychoeducation about trauma and its effects, and also look at it from that religious basis as well. But we also tell them how the integration or seeking help through therapy is not contradicting their faith, but it's also seen as a profound means of healing. We then look at attachment-based psychotherapy. Okay, so that's specific. We look at the psychotherapeutic approaches. There are new modern ones like EMDR. There's also attachment-based family therapy, and you can extend that to attachment-based religious coping therapy that results from trauma. We make them feel safe physiologically as well. We use our modern psychological techniques, and we then use the therapies to help the client build a secure attachment to God and others. But that's also, we do this by integrating CBT, so cognitive framework. So we understand why we understand, we try and understand the root of why they think Allah's punitive, it was unjust or unfair. Okay, and then we provide the alternative beliefs that stem from the Quran and Sunnah, because often, as Zuleyha said in her presentations, people may have grown up with a punitive sense of God. Okay, and we know this is unjust because that's not true to the scripture. So what we do as psychologists is introduce them to what Islam says about Allah's mercy, Allah's compassion. So we look at the 99 names of Allah. So what we're doing here is spiritual integration. We encourage the client to engage in spiritual practices that do promote the healing, prayer, dhikr, reading religious texts as well, and help them explore how their relationship with Allah can be a source of comfort and support, just like any other therapeutic process where we seek out different types of coping mechanisms. And obviously when we do this is a form of narrative therapy. So, and that's a technique that we use with clients to construct a coherent and empowering narrative of their trauma experiences. So, and we do that in light of their understanding of their faith and where they are with their faith as well. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you so much, Hanan. That's great. So people are asking about, publications, recommendations on Afiya. So if you can, and also your PowerPoints, I will ask the speakers to give me their PDF of their PowerPoints and I'll share them with you. There is a question here, about the well-being of psychologists and counselors while treating clients. That's a very more clinical question. How do we inculcate unbiased therapeutic practices? This is a question for all of you, I suppose, in the training of future psychologists through Islamic psychology curricula. So if anyone wants to tackle that, Professor Rassool, Hanan, anyone, sorry.
Okay, I'll just reread the question.
I guess it's about while I think Hanan presented on Afiya and Well-being, and I think Sonia is asking about the well-being of the psychologist.
Of course, yeah, that's very important. In fact, that's what's lacking. In fact, I'm hoping to write a book about this, but inshallah, it's about the soul of the therapist. I call it the soul of the therapist because this is where clinical supervision come in. Yeah, it's how does the psychologist or the therapist heal themselves. Yeah. So in terms of self-awareness, self-development, developing competence, but also one of the most important things is clinical supervision. If you're going to work with people with emotional problem, trauma, you need to have clinical supervision. There's no, there's no dispute about that. So one way, of course, apart from what I mentioned, clinical supervision would be one of the things how people deal with their own emotion relating to other people's trauma and so forth. Otherwise, you carry this infinite business to your life, to your family, to your cats and dogs and everything else. Anyway, you sort of displace these emotions anyway. And the clinical supervision opportunity for you to release those cathartic emotions, for you to discuss about option to have to deal with clients and so forth. So I think for me, I hope to see it more and more. Of course, in UK, they're starting groups of clinical supervision, and so forth. For Islamic psychologists, which is quite good, very, but I think we need to develop that way because that will look after the health of the therapist, what I call the soul of the therapist. Yeah.
There's a lot of questions. I'm just conscious of time. We will be mindful of time and wrap up at 4:30. But if you're happy to stick around, if the panelists agree, we can extend that by 5 minutes, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
There's a question for obsessive compulsive disorder, for example, people usually more religious have them, especially for cleanliness. What's the reason for this? I suppose it's again because of the perception we have of Allah. Please comment on it. Mubashara is asking this question. So whoever, if anyone of you would like to address that.
Can I just go back to one of the questions about resources? Professor Rassool is probably one of the most widely published, so any of his texts, are profoundly awesome and referenced academically. So, and it's not a bias. He's actually one of the most published academics in Islamic psychology, and we're all truly honored that he's here.
This is very embarrassing.
I know, I'm like that too when people do it, but it's true. Let's just stick to facts. And honestly, it is a fact. It is a fact. He's the most widely published. So, and it's easy to read. That's why we use his textbooks for the graduate certificate in Islamic psychology. And I'm very picky about the textbooks we use, and we use his textbooks. In terms of OCD, why it's more common for Muslims, that's a myth. It's not true. OCD happens everywhere around the world with all different communities, spiritualities. It's just that we process it differently. We may connect because we're connecting it to our lifestyle. So when you've got OCD for cleaning, versus OCD for being scrupulous and, having doubts and so forth, that's because we're Muslim. That's the content of a lot of our frameworks. So if I can just clarify, OCD is not more so for Muslims. Just our content would be more religiously and spiritually inclined. And I'll leave the rest of the answer for Professor Rassool, who is more experienced, inshallah.
Professor Rassool, any comments from you?
No, I mean you answer it fully. I go back. I can I just take somebody mentioned about a question there, which I look. Is about somebody doing a course on a certificate in Islamic psychology, and her motivation is to help her daughter. Now, of course, it's good to have knowledge. It's good to have authentic knowledge. That's fine, but it does not deal with the practical application of this, because this is not a skill-based course. Yeah, it's a theory course. So my advice would be to get help from a professionals. Yeah. I mean, of course, you're part of that, treatment package, but, trying to do a course and try to treat your daughter is not it probably make you understand. I don't think I know the course as well because I developed the course of Islamic psychology at IUU. I know the course very well because, like I say, I wrote it. So I know we don't cover, we cover child development and so forth, but we don't go deep enough. It's not practical and so forth. So my suggestion, of course, carry on with authentic knowledge. That's fine, and you understand your daughter better. But at the same time, I think, if your daughter is diagnosed with ADHD, then I think you need to seek professional help anyway. You can learn from that, and from that you can start, helping her as well. Thank you. I hope I said the right thing from the clinician point of view anyway.
And you did, because I was going to say that, when someone studies Islamic psychology, it's self-transformative wherever you're studying it. But I think that if you're interested in a specific diagnosis, always get the advice of a professional for that specific area, and someone who's trained in ADHD as well, because not all clinicians know every condition and they don't specialize in every condition, so it's best to seek a clinician who specializes in ADHD. And it's honorable that this mother is actually trying to understand ADHD for her daughter to support her, because early intervention with ADHD is the best, because then you scaffold her in later life, whether it's university, work, marriage, and so forth. All the techniques that she'll learn now will help her in later life. Because what we're finding, especially with females, is that they're being diagnosed with ADHD in their late 30s and 40s, and autism also, but they're being lost in, whereas they catch the males quicker because, they're seen as naughty boys at school, whereas girls will mask their symptoms. So I really commend the mother for going over and beyond, but seek a clinician who specializes in ADHD to best support your daughter, inshallah.
The next question is more about an institutional issue. We have Sister Hafsa all the way from France, and she is sending her salams and asking that there is very limited resources on Islamic psychology in that country. Should I say I'm not surprised? Maybe that's a very politically comment. But maybe I should just ask, she wants to know if there are any resources, if you can guide her. Obviously, we provide Master of Islamic Psychology, and any, if there's any funded institutions. So any advice, maybe Zuleyha, you can talk to that if you have any recommendations.
Yeah, I guess, the scholarship part through me. The finding scholarship is always a challenge, but we could have, I think the sister's got a Master of Psychology already, or Islamic Psychology, so she would potentially qualify for a PhD in psychology. And we do have a number of students at SISAC who are doing psychology-related PhDs, and we do have potential supervisors in that space as well. But with the scholarship, we do have, CSU does have international scholarship. It is very competitive, but, it's worth exploring it with CSU. You could do it from France. You don't have to be in Australia to do it. And Mashid, as a HDR coordinator, you might want to add further to that.
Any PhD inquiries, send me a question.
Yeah, and I didn't get the question right. Is that the sister from France, is it? And she's asking for literature.
I think resources on the subject, but also,
from France.
For masters, she's assuming that we're. I think she's looking for institutions that have funded positions available. I'm not too sure, to be honest.
Yeah,
I think there's a couple. We answered that question. There was another question I just missed. Sorry, I keep scrolling up because there was things I didn't want to miss. Haris is saying, one quick question: how can a person with ADHD improve concentration in Salah? Stopping the brain can become a huge challenge, and ADHD needs constant distraction.
I'll answer that quickly because I have ADHD and I can empathize with Salah and distraction. I try and look at different ways to concentrate on what I'm reciting by imagining reading it in Arabic or transliterated English. You can use practical elements to remember which rak'ah you are on, because I understand how difficult it is. It really is. And then I read something where a mother this was really, really very, very well done. And she got clearance from scholars and so forth, where her daughter, who's got ADHD, couldn't concentrate in Salah. And so she was allowed to wear headphones and go and record her voice, reciting the Qurans and work with it as well. And people might say, oh, how can you do that? It's a very passive approach. But these are people who have a neurodevelopmental condition. There are dispensations available because they're not neurotypical. So it's not for everyone. But as soon as you then develop the concentration, then you let go of those scaffolding elements. So it's not something you start to use for life. You start to practice. And sometimes, also, and I know that our community are very, have issues with medication. With ADHD, medication helps people focus as well. So that's another alternative.
I'm very sorry, but it is 4:35 and we have reached there is so much, I think there's so much questions and enthusiasm and feedback from your presentations. I've just popped in your email addresses for Hanan, Zuleyha and Professor Rassool there. So please send them your questions. Please don't stop, email them and ask them. And I will send you the recording of this video as well as their presentations. I just want to once again in a wrap say thank you to our wonderful international. We have Professor Rassool who's joined us from Mauritius this morning, our afternoon. Hanan, of course, and Zuleyha from Melbourne, Hanan from Sydney, and all of you from wherever you may be. Thank you so much for joining these colloquiums. We were exploring Islamic psychology, a wonderful topic. Some of you are interested in this field. I hope that there's information there that has given you some food for thought. It's certainly given me so much to contemplate on this afternoon. Let's continue the conversation. Join us in the events to come on the topic, and you can speak to, these are the 3 lecturers that, researchers, scholars that you will be dealing with if you take on the courses as well. So thank you so much for attendance, and thank you to our speakers. Let's give them a virtual round of applause. Congratulations, and thank you so much. Please stay tuned, and Juma Mubarak. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you.
Wa alaikum salam. Wa alaikum salam. Anyway, salam. They can write to me in French. I speak fluent French, so there's no problem.
I know that about you.
Friends, but in French. Okay.
They can write to me in Turkish.
Okay. I think we are global, so we have to open to different languages, really.
And a few Arabic comments there from Rawa.
And Rashid received an email in Farsi, I think, the other day.
Oh, no, that's...
Between us, we're global, aren't we?
Okay. Sure.
Okay, everyone. Assalamu alaikum.